This is Dan Schneider on this Dan Schneider video interview. It is another of my Why This Film is Great series, and I have two fellows who will be talking to me about the 1963 It's a Mad, 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 Mad World comedy, and we'll start in a moment. Eric San Juan and Price Morgan are my guests. We'll be talking about the 1963 all-star comedy, It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. Eric has appeared before, done a couple, at least two, maybe three films before with me and some other fellows. Eric, if you could give a little background about who you are, what you do, and some opening thoughts about this all-star extravaganza.
So, of course, my name is Eric. I've been interested in film for a number of years. I used to do the film reviews back in the early days of the WWW. Since that time, I've written some books on the films of Martin Scorsese, Akira Kurosawa, a couple on Alfred Hitchcock as well. And boy, it's a mad, 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 mad world. This is a movie that I came to in my youth, despite the fact that it was before my time. It kind of sucked me in right away and has been one of my favorite comedies ever since. We were kind of talking off the air, and Dan, you had mentioned that you think it's one of the greatest, if not the greatest, ensemble comedies in film history, and I have to agree with you on that. This is, to me, always one that I point to and saying, like, this is how you make an ensemble work. I think what's even more interesting about it is that it kind of goes beyond that, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this later, in that it's also a thrilling action movie with some pretty wild stunts that you wouldn't expect from a comedy. And it's kind of an epic. I watched the restored version that Criterion did some years back, so it's close to 3.5 hours long from a comedy, and yet every moment is gold. And I'm really looking forward to talking with you guys.
My other guest is Price Morgan. He has done video essays. I found one of his on this film. Price, if you could, like Eric, give a little background about yourself and your opening thoughts about the film.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in the Los Angeles area, and my parents raised me on mid-century film and television media. And in the late 2000s, my dad first introduced me to this movie, and I fell in love with it right away. One of the things that I found to be really entertaining about it is that I recognized so many of the different actors and personalities that I knew from mid-century film and TV that I had been watching my whole life up to that point. You know, regardless of which mid-century American movie you had seen, probably one of the actors from that movie ended up in It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. And so for me, it was like seeing a giant reunion of all of my favorite actors in one big piece. That was very cohesive, that came together and was just very entertaining the whole way through. So off of that interest, late in the 2000s, I started a documentary web series called WCast. The highlights of my experience producing that show were conducting hours of video interviews with the special effects director of the movie, Danny Lee. Also, the stars Barry Chase and Marvin Kaplan, both of who played supporting roles in the movie. I also got to visit the property where they had filmed the scenes of the Santa Rosita State Park, where the Big W set was located, before that was bulldozed in 2014. I also got to go to a lot of screenings of the movie in Los Angeles area, so I got to see Jonathan Winters live, got to see Carl Reiner live. I briefly met Mickey Rooney, which was very cool. So it was great to be a kid at that time in the late 2000s, early 2010s, right at the very end of the time when we still had a fair number of actors from the movie still alive. And getting to see them live was really something special. It felt like a connection to film history that, my kids, if I ever have kids, are not going to be able to have that same connection, which is a shame. So anyway, I did that web series from 2011, I think, to 2016. I would like to do more on it. I would like to release more of those video interviews, but life has gotten in the way for quite a few years now. So yeah, I'm also really looking forward to chatting about it. I think it's a really fun movie.
Did you say that you met Mickey Rooney? Did I hear that?
Yeah. I was
Now,
16. It was 91, I think.
Yeah. Now his real name, I think, is Edward Yule. Does he go? Did he go by Mickey or Edward?
Oh, he went by Mickey Rooney.
Okay.
Yeah, he We only spoke briefly. It was actually under the front awning of the Cinerama Dome at the 50th anniversary screening of It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. And he was just chatting with fans from his wheelchair. He was a nice guy. You know, he was willing to chat with everybody. You know, he was quite old at that point.
Before we get into the film proper, I just have to ask you, since you're quite a bit younger than both Eric and I am. I know my parents were 45, 50 years older than I was, and because of that, I often had a feel of life in the 20s and 30s, the Great Depression and whatnot, from their childhoods, as they told me. It sounds to me like you had a similar thing where I don't know if your parents were that much older, but you seem to have a knowledge of things several decades before your actual existence.
My parents are both old souls. They were both born within a few months of the release of It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, so they didn't catch the 50s and 60s in media when they were alive, because they were not alive at that time. But growing up through high school and college, they would watch reruns of mid-century TV. They would watch mid-century movies, and they felt like that would be a fun thing to bring me up on. So I watched a lot of mid-century media growing up.
So, Eric, one of the things that spurred me to do this and contact you fellows now was about a month or so ago. I hadn't done some film stuff because I've had some other projects this year, and so my whole interviews have been a little bit slower than usual. But I saw this video essay from a fellow who compared the characters in It's a Mad, Mad, Mad World to real-life Trumpers. And I thought it was the most bizarre comparison, because the claim was that everyone in this film is selfish and stupid and greedy, from Spencer Tracy on downward, and since we live in the era of Trump, good or bad, that enjoying this film and these characters is somehow giving aid and comfort to the worst in humanity. And I found it an astoundingly dense and just stupid review or essay. But apparently, according to this person, a lot of younger people have twofold reasons for not enjoying this movie. The one I just mentioned, as well as the fact of the datedness of, who the hell today knows of Dick Shawn kind of thing. So what is your response to that kind of criticism, Eric, to start?
I think both of those reasons why younger people might not be into this film kind of fall flat on their face. First, the idea that these characters are somehow reflective of a Trumper mindset, and that's why younger people would be attracted to the film, kind of rings hollow to me when shows like It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia are huge hits among young people these days, and and then shows like that are packed wall to wall with people who are generally reprehensible. I think the characters in this movie, while most of them are jerks in one way or the other, I don't think the majority of them stray quite that far into being just totally reprehensible people. And there are glimmers of goodness in there as well. I would certainly point to Jonathan Winter's wonderful Lenny Pike character, who just seems to be a kind of a regular every man who got caught up in this thing, and he doesn't want to be driven by greed. He's kind of getting pulled into it by everyone else that's around him. He kind of feels like as if his hand is forced. As for the other point, I mean, I grew up absolutely loving this movie, and the only people I knew, because the cast was all completely before my time, the only people I initially knew the first time I watched this movie were Mr. Roper, Mr. Furley, and Mr. Howell. The actors, younger version of these characters that I had known from television sitcoms. It didn't make, well, and of course I knew the Three Stooges because my old man watched the Three Stooges growing, and I watched them with him growing up. But otherwise, I didn't know who these actors were at the time. It didn't matter. You don't need to know, even in the cameos. I don't think you need to know who they are, who the actors are, in order for them to have impact, because it's just funny. It's energetic. It's got this constant forward motion. I absolutely reject both of those points, and I think you put it far too kindly in your rejection of them as well.
Price, any comments from you on that?
I mean, I guess I don't have a strong feeling about a theory of why young people would not be interested in this movie, because I don't feel like I have a strong feeling that young people would not be interested in this movie. I think the primary reason why it's not a well-known cultural quantity among young people today is just that mid-century media in general is not like a well-known cultural quantity. I wouldn't say that like, this movie is less well-known among young people than like other contemporary movies from 1963. I mean, I would imagine that it would be very, very challenging to find a young person who has seen Cleopatra, which is another major movie from 1963. And I think that, just in general, people tend to be more drawn toward whatever the current media is. And so, to whatever extent that younger people would watch mid-century media, they would probably be just as interested to watch this as anything else from that time.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with you, Bryce. And I want to add that, I have friends in my peer group, my same age as me, who haven't seen the movie or hadn't seen the movie until I introduced it to them. And they hadn't seen the movie because, like most people, they watched the films that they knew growing up, that were coming out growing up, and they kind of stuck to their era. And I think that tends to be something that most mainstream viewers do. I don't think most people have the experience that Price had or that I did. My parents introduced me to, in the same way, films that were from before my time and before their time as well. But most people don't have that experience. So I don't. This movie is not unusual in that regard. And Price, I think you make an excellent point saying other contemporary films were adjacent to this one. Younger viewers now don't know those, them as well, possibly by name only, and that's about it.
Yeah, and I think one thing I also wanted to mention, when you were talking about the qualities of the characters and various characters not being all bad, some characters sort of being drawn into this broader sort of mad dash for this loot. To me, it's true that a lot of the characters in this movie are really unpleasant people. Like the movie has a lot of tension, it has a lot of nastiness in it. I recently showed it to an older friend of mine who is 89. Who is actually 90 now, and he found it to be very nasty. And I think that's a reaction a fair number of people have to it. And I think that what that misses is that the comedy is coming from that. The comedy is coming from the way this movie is lampooning what the social context of 1962, 1963 is pushing these people to do. Why are these people who have so much available to them in this, context of unprecedented wealth, why do they want so much more? Why are they willing to double cross others to get that? And I think that's kind of the message that Kramer and the writers are going for with this movie, is to sort of examine the question of is this system really working? If it's creating people, just everyday people who do these kinds of things.
And you'll note that the characters routinely get their comeuppance. They're routinely foiled by fate in the things that they're doing. And there may be others, but the one primary exception of that is Dorothy, the wife character, Sid Caesar's wife in the film, who I'm sorry, not Milton Berle's wife, who she has that wonderful moment with Spencer Tracy at the very end. Nothing really bad happens to her, and near the end, she gets to sort of express it. This is all too much. I wish that we didn't need to be among these people doing these terrible things. She just wanted to be sort of done with it, and she's really the one character in the movie who doesn't have anything nasty happen to her, because she doesn't do anything nasty herself. And I think that says something.
So, I know my wife is almost 50, and I know she talks about some of the younger people that she works with at her job, and they won't watch black and white movies, for example. And I know online when I watch, something comes up as I'm doing work, and as YouTube videos, I have just scrolling a playlist that comes up. Oftentimes, you'll hear about songs that are being played, and some reviewers who are younger will not want to even listen to non-auto-tuned songs. They feel that it's somehow not polished enough. So I think that's part of a larger trend. But I wanted to talk and I'll start with you, Eric. The sort of all-star cavalcade of stars kind of film was big in the early talking era of the 1930s. You have the stars of 1934 or Grand Hotel kind of thing. And then you'd have a little bit later, you'd get, or say directly after this period, in the 1970s, you had The Towering Inferno and The Poseidon Adventure and Airport and all these disaster movies where you'd have all-star cast. in the 50s and 60s, you tended to have, I think, either remakes of European films like Europa 70, where you'd get an all-star cast, but they were sometimes in smaller little filmlets glued together, or you would have the Magnificent Seven kind of thing, something where you'd have, 5 or 6 stars, in some all-star extravaganza. Where do you slot this film as a comedy within the genre of what I guess we could call all-star filmmaking, Eric?
One thing that I always remember this film striking me as, for me, it kind of felt like, again, as a younger viewer, it felt like a precursor to the Cannonball Run, which was to me kind of my introduction to this idea of like a big ensemble comedy movie, which coincidentally both had a similar theme in the kind of race across country, or at least the countryside. But you're certainly right in that it, in some ways, it kind of feels slightly out of place in its era, especially in that in this all-star cast, none of them step up and are the star, which is something that I think you often see in ensemble flicks, where you might have a very large cast of well-known names and faces, but still just one or two of them are the primary names. And even in the Magnificent Seven, that was the case. To bring up one that you had mentioned, but I don't really think that's the case here. You have luminaries like Spencer Tracy, who is everybody is sort of supporting one another in a sense, and everyone is co-starring with one another. So it and yet it hangs together pretty well that way. And I think that kind of makes it a little unique. I have a hard time coming up with a lot of films to directly compare it to in that respect, because it's like I said, there really isn't anyone who steps forward. At least I don't think who steps forward and is the star. It's not Milton Berle. It's not Spencer Tracy. It's not Sid Caesar. It's not the great duo of Hackett and Rooney. It's kind of all have equal billing here.
Price, any comments about the all-star extravaganza type of film?
Yeah, I mean, I think that a major reason why it would be smart for a studio to put something like that together is it creates a big event for people to go to. When this movie was in its original roadshow presentation, it's hours and hours long. There's an intermission. There's a souvenir program. This is the original souvenir program that you would get at the theater, and it has biographies. It's got photos. It's got making of stories. It's really cool to think about getting something like this at a movie, because you wouldn't have that today. So it's set up much more like almost like a Broadway show, which today you would still regard as an event to go to that. If you look at the original marketing of this movie, one of the major marketing taglines is like, everybody who's anybody is in it. And so the idea that people are getting, sort of teed up to expect is that you're going to know people who are in this movie. You're going to know stars of your favorite sitcoms, of your favorite movies. They're all going to be here. And it's just going to be very thrilling to see all of these people from all these different walks of media in the same place. That's what really resonated with me about it, I think, when I initially saw it. And so I think that's a major reason why that was so successful and so often replicated in the decades afterward. And I do want to also echo Eric's thought about the idea that this movie really is a true ensemble movie. Spencer Tracy does get first billing in some of the promotional materials, but he's not the main character, I would say. He might be like the anchor character, if that's a thing, but really it is so much of a mutually intertwined set of supporting characters. And if you look at later movies like The Poseidon Adventure, I mean, you obviously have a main character there. Sure, it's an ensemble piece, but Gene Hackman is the main character. And in this movie, I wouldn't say there is.
Well, I think Tracy gets top billing on most of the movie posters because he's not associated with comedy. He lends an air of gravitas. In that era he was doing, Look Who's Coming to Dinner and these sorts of socially conscious films. But let me ask you, Price, Stanley Kramer was also someone whose primary fame as a film producer and director was as the socially conscious director. And there have been a lot of, I guess, legends over the decades as to why he wanted to do this film. Probably the biggest is just that he wanted to prove that he could do a comedy. So he did the over the top big comedy just to show that he could do it. Since you're so well informed on this, can you say yay or nay to that, or any other of the myths of its making?
Well, I mean, I think that, Stanley Kramer does have a section about this in his autobiography, which is called The Mad, 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 Mad World, I think. I have a copy of that in my living room. I haven't read it for a while, though, so I couldn't give you his exact explanation. But my personal read of this film is that it's not actually all that far removed from the rest of the Kramer catalog. Yes, it's set up as a laugh out loud comedy movie, but it also is a socially conscious movie. The only reason why the jokes land is that they're getting at something real, which is social pathologies in America circa mid-century. If nothing that was going on in this movie resonated with the audience as something that was plausible, that could be a result of, what was going on in America at that time, then it wouldn't be funny. At least the jokes in the movie wouldn't be funny. And so to me, when I watch this movie now, I think it's very funny and I laugh at it, but I also think that, there's a really biting critique of greed in America, of consumerism in America, of the sort of self-imposed scarcity mindset that comes with that consumerism, so that even these people in like comfortable middle-class careers will drive themselves crazy over the opportunity to have more and more and more, such that they could double-cross others, become dishonest, flout the laws, and create a really negative result for a lot of people. So that's my overall take on this. Is an outlier in the Kramer catalog.
Eric, any comments about Kramer?
I think Price's point is on point. Well, when you it's not just a madcap comedy. There are social points and political points being made in it, though not necessarily in your face. But they're there. There are many opportunities for this group, and I think this is one of the key points. There are many opportunities for this group to come to an agreement with one another, to and kind of share this wealth that they've found. There are many opportunities for them to do the right thing or to do right by one another. And of course, they routinely undercut one another and choose not to do that. I think it's also kind of telling that the powers that be sit back and allow this to happen. They sit back and watch this happen. And there's kind of I think there might be something to be said about that, whether or not that was an intentional kind of theme or plot point that was inserted in there. This idea that those in authority allowed this to happen. I don't know. Possibly Price can speak to that better than I can. But that's something that's always kind of stood out to me, is the idea that the police purposely sat back and said, you know what, we're going to let these people cause mayhem so that we can reach our ends and our goals.
I think that's just such a smart point to bring up, the idea that not only these sort of everyday citizens are being portrayed as so morally corrupt, but the systems of authority in place that are enforcing the rules that they're breaking, those systems are also corrupt. From the mayor's office in this movie, the mayor's accepting bribes. The police are threatening and blackmailing each other. In order to keep the whole system afloat, or to get what they can get out of the system. So everybody, both in the state in the movie, and then also just the citizens living under the state, they're all just totally motivated by this greedy mentality, that is leading them to double cross each other and do all these horrible things that are depicted in the movie.
Well, and think of the way in real life, if insurance companies got a whiff of a plane crashing through a restaurant window, or flying through a billboard, or the final tower scene with the crazy engine that fire engine that goes wacky because of the too much weight, or just them speeding around. If they had hit just a couple of cars and they found out that Spencer Tracy's the police department knew about it, so there is that suspension of disbelief. What I've always found interesting, though, is that the other Stanley K of that era, Stanley Kubrick, also made his sort of extravaganza comedy, Dr. Strangelove, within a year or so of this being made. And although it's different, it's not the same type of comedy. It does have half a dozen major stars of that era in it, and it came about. So I don't know, not that I see any connection between them. I've always found it interesting. Price, let me start with you. So 1963, this film was in production for several years, and it was one of those kinds of films where people were dying to be in it, even if they just had a cameo, because they thought it could, get their name higher up in the Hollywood rankings or whatnot. We know about a lot of the cast members. There probably have been a handful of famous omissions. For example, I can think of Jackie Gleason or Lucille Ball were not in it. They would have still been big stars in the 1960s. Who are the characters, or rather the actors, who were not in the film that wanted to be in the film? Do you know?
So one of the difficulties of talking about the production of this movie is that the fandom around this movie and the just the sheer amount of discussion that's happened around this movie has spawned a lot of stories about the production that are very difficult to verify. In fact, even in my discussions with stars of this movie, they would occasionally give me contradicting stories about the production of the movie. And so, there's been many rumors about, certain people were cast to fill certain roles. So like one of the famous rumors is the idea that Ernie Kovacs was originally scheduled to play the role of Melville Crump that went to Sid Caesar. As far as I know, there's been no verification of that that's reliable. That's just something that's floated around for a long time. Now, I do think that there are a lot of actors at the time who would have been good fits to be in the movie. Dick Van Dyke was starting out his Hollywood career at that point, and I think he would have been a natural person to include in the movie. The issue at that point, I think, is he had one movie under his belt, and that movie didn't come out until much later in the production of It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. I think his first major Hollywood movie was Bye Bye Birdie, which came out in 1963, by which point all the production of It's a Mad, Mad, Mad World was done. There are, of course, a lot of, more traditionally straight actors who would be, I think, also, well served with a cameo in this movie. I think Jimmy Stewart would have been a fun one to include. But in terms of specific people who were either specifically passed over or cast and then recast, I couldn't tell you too much about that would be reliable.
Any comments from you, Eric, on people who might have been good fits in the movie but didn't make it or wanted to be in it?
I will say that I have this movie has a Mandela effect moment for me, in that for some reason I've always had it in the back of my head that at some point there was an Abbott and Costello cameo that got left on the cutting room floor, and how this got seated in my head, I don't know, because I don't think there's any factual basis for that whatsoever, not even the rumor mill, to the best of my knowledge. But for whatever reason, perhaps the inclusion of the Three Stooges cameo is sort of what's seated in there, because I often associate Stooges and Abbott and Costello as coming from sort of the same era of comedy, even though they didn't actually. But for me, they did as a kid. But yeah. So there's that. There's that.
I think one of the better verified stories about a person who had specifically really wanted to be in the film and did not end up being in the film is Don Rickles, who younger viewers would know as Mr. Potato Head from Toy Story. The story goes that he would roast Stanley Kramer in his Las Vegas act over passing on casting Rickles in the movie. I don't know 100% if that's true, but I would imagine it would be fairly easy to verify either way.
I think the reason, Eric, that you associated the Three Stooges and Abbott and Costello is because Joe Besser, I believe it was, played on the Abbott and Costello TV show of the 1950s. He played, I think, what was his name, Skippy, the perpetual juvenile who went...
Oh, you know what? I think you might be onto something there. Yeah, I think you might be onto something there. I do recall as a kid the Three Stooges cameo, initially throwing me off because I had generally watched the Stooges with, of course, classic Curly or Shemp. I wasn't really super familiar with Curly Joe. They didn't get run a lot, and even my father wasn't a big fan of Curly Joe, so he would kind of skip those episodes. So when the Stooges came up on screen, I said, well, wait a minute, who's this third guy? He looks like Curly, but that's not Curly.
So let's talk about the actual film and the main stars. There's about a 10 or 12 what you would call the main cast. The setup is that these people are driving along a California highway, going this way, that way, wherever they're going, camping, making deliveries, whatever it is. And almost all of them are passed by this speeding car, this car that just flies off the road down into the canyon. And the men in each vehicle go down to see the wreckage to find the character of Jimmy Durante's character there, ready to pass out and die, which he does. And so the main characters then, other than the Spencer Tracy character, are Milton Berle's character with his wife and Ethel Merman, his mother-in-law, Mickey Rooney and Buddy Hackett, Sid Caesar and his wife, and then, am I missing someone? Sid Caesar, his wife, Buddy Hackett. Oh, and then the Lenny Pike, Jonathan Winters character. So it's initially the four main cars, and then it sort of blossoms out with. Of that initial crew there, yeah, I mean, I've never been a big fan of Mickey Rooney, but I think this is one of his best roles. Certainly, I think his best adult role. He does wonders with, I think, Buddy Hackett. They make a really great comedy team. But I have to go with Jonathan Winters and probably Ethel Merman are my favorite characters within the film. Which of those initial characters stand out for you, Price?
I've never had a very strong feeling about which ones stand out the most. I think that for me, it would have to be the Jonathan Winters character, because Jonathan Winters is coming to the sort of initial situation of the movie a little bit removed from like the level of cynicism that the other characters have. He is the one who, in the initial discussion about how to divide up the treasure, should they find the treasure, is saying, well, we got to report this to taxes. Yeah. So he has, I think, a level of investment in following the rules of the system as it's been set out that the others don't have, because they already, on some level, know it's corrupt. They know that if they report this on taxes, it's just going to go and support the mayor, Officer Culpepper, Officer Aloysius over at the Santa Rosita Police Department, who are totally corrupt and who are also just trying to extract as much as they can. And so over the course of the movie, I think that the arc of Lenny Pike is him sort of getting a little bit of a clearer view of how corrupt the society is at that time. And that's an interesting arc.
His famous spiel there is, even politicians and businessmen who rob and steal from people every day, even they got to pay taxes.
Right, yeah. And so he's looking at American society in 1962, 63, and he's saying, this is great. I'm proud to pay my taxes because, this isn't a corrupt situation. And everybody else is at this point too cynical to have that point of view at the beginning of the movie. So they have less interesting character arcs, I would say. I don't know, what do you all think?
How about Eric?
I mean, I think we're all very much on the same page here because, yeah, certainly for me, Jonathan Winters is the character who stands out for all the reasons that you just indicated, Price. I mean, for me, I kind of feel like he's a guy who initially comes to this with a good heart. As he gets pulled further and further into going against his own moral code in the interest of greed and getting this money, he initially sort of almost feels put upon in doing this. You get this sense from him that he's kind of like, oh, guys, why are you doing this to me? Why are you making me do this? Why are you making me go to these lengths? Can't we just do the right thing? And I also have to echo Dan in Ethel Merman. Though she's intentionally a character who's meant to be abrasive and in your face and very annoying. And that, in many instances, could wear thin. But I just think she steals every scene she's in. She has it turned up to 11 the entire movie. I don't know where this woman found the energy to deliver these scenes the way she did. And she's wonderful in almost everything she's in. But here, she's just on another level. I just absolutely love her character, despite the fact that I would not want to spend more than 2 minutes in a room or enclosed space with her. I think she's just absolutely fantastic. But yeah, I think for me, the beating heart of this movie is Lenny Pike. It's the Jonathan Winters character. I think he is this film doesn't really have an audience surrogate character, but if there is one, Pike comes the closest to being the audience member in the movie.
So after they try to find ways to divvy it up, and they go through, 2 dozen ways, I think it's Buddy Hackett who says, "Well, every man for himself, including the old bag," meaning Ethel Merman. And so they go off on they separate, and for most of the film their paths don't cross. We see them in parallel, meeting people, getting screwed over, whatever. The Lenny Pike character, Jonathan Winters, meets Phil Silver's character, and that's really some fun stuff there. Ethel Merman and Milton Berle, they're people. She tries calling her over the top son, Sylvester, played by Dick Shawn, who's the typical hipster of the early 60s, with his girlfriend doing the cha-cha or whatever. You have, and Milton Berle then goes off and meets Terry Thomas. You then have Benji, Buddy Hackett, and Mickey Rooney's characters. They meet the Mr. Howell, Jim Backus character, who flies a plane, and things happen there. And then basically Sid Caesar and his wife try to get equipment to dig things up. They end up getting locked in a basement for at least a third of the film and trying to get out. So of these four sort of predicaments, which ones resonated with you with the characters? I guess to me, I would have to go with the Rooney and Hackett, the flying the airplane, because it involves so many other characters, and then they just somehow get away with it. But let me, Eric, which of those four of the four main cars that branch into four different plots, which one resonates with you the most?
Though I do enjoy Hackett and Rooney's dynamic together, they're both actors and they're both comedians that I'm generally not a big fan of, but they really work together as a pair, and some of that stuff in the plane is quite zany. But the one that stands out to me is Milton Berle's pairing with Terry Thomas. Just their dialogue is just absolutely fantastic. They have a great dynamic together. They're very funny. There's a little bit of like a biting U.S. versus UK, UK versus U.S. commentary in there as well, which is a lot of fun to see. And Terry Thomas is just a lot of fun. He's a great introduction to this ever-growing ensemble cast. I enjoyed almost all their scenes together, especially that really awkward fight that they end up having, sort of on the road side, on the cliff side, which is a lot of fun. Yeah, those two together are who Rooney and Hackett are a little more sort of traditional screwball. These guys are much more about the dialogue, and I really like that. And Berle, I mean, he's rarely been better than he is here.
Price.
Yeah, I think that for me, my favorite sort of path from the initial set of cars that stops on the mountain to the state park, 3/4 of the way through the movie, my favorite arc is going to be the Jonathan Winters arc, the Lenny Pike arc, because what happens with him is a little unique in that instead of being thwarted by like technological issues, like getting locked in a basement or like ending up on a plane that is not properly piloted or is not properly maintained, he's getting thwarted by other people who are trying to get the treasure. So for example, he tells the Phil Silvers character about the treasure, about where it is, because he is at this point still so earnestly believing in the idea that other people are basically fair, that other people will want to collaborate with him instead of compete with him. And at every turn when he brings that collaborative ethos to these circumstances, he just gets completely railroaded. So over the course of the movie, you see this person who is starting out with such an open and trusting viewpoint, becoming more and more cynical to the point that he's chasing another person and trying to kill them with a pickaxe on the same day. I think that's just such an interesting arc, and it really plays a big part in the commentary of the movie.
Yeah, and go ahead, Eric.
To say, and speaking of not only just his character, and but the commentary in the movie, I think a great contrast to him is the Phil Silvers character, who is arguably the biggest jerk of the bunch. Right? He's quite awful to people, and I think it's interesting that Phil Silvers, Jonathan Winters is repeatedly thwarted by other people. Lenny Pike is trying to do the right thing, and other people thwart him. Phil Silvers is often thwarted or set back by other people, but he's set back by people who seem to be fundamentally decent folks. Right, his first, I think, one of his first big setbacks after he and Pike part ways is helping the father get back to back to his small home out out in the hills. Then there's the kid. The kid is just trying to help him get out, but inadvertently leads him into a river. And Silvers is such a he's such a jerk. Just to go back to that again, that he keeps digging himself in deeper and deeper and deeper because he just doesn't know how to deal decently with the nice people that he encounters along the way. And I think this movie does that sort of thing a lot, where people are hoisted by their own petard.
Yeah, and that even though I said that the Rooney and Hackett plane flying sequence to me was I think the sequence that I found the most interesting when it was happening. I think without a doubt the biggest set piece, the biggest moment of comedy has to be Lenny Pike versus the two garage nerds, Arnold Stang and Marvin Kaplan. I mean, every time you see that, I mean, I'm thinking, okay, there's a Buster Keaton thing. It goes back to silent comedy things, getting hit on the head and having no effect. Or first it does have effect, then Jonathan Winter seems to be steeled to physical pain. And the whole thing being just in 5 minutes just being torn apart. I mean, it never fails to make me just laugh hysterically. And I think it comes basically about 50% into the movie, so it's basically like the headline comedic piece, I think. Price, what is your take on that moment?
I think comparing that or relating that to silent comedy is a really apt comparison, or that's relevant, because this movie is, I think, to a certain extent, trying to draw on the history of comedy and bringing in comedians and comedic techniques from the entire era of film comedy up to that point. So you have great cameos like Buster Keaton showing up in this movie, and it's a shame that the large extent of his role was cut from the movie, because that would have been, I think, a really neat thing to have in the movie as well. But you're looking at the gas station sequence. I think it's at that point the movie is really confirming what the audience may have suspected up to that point, which is that this is going to be just a completely over-the-top and ridiculous movie. It's not founded in reality quite. It's designed to be heightened because comedy is heightened. And so I think that's a great thing you brought up.
And I think the cops even say when they're watching this, I've never seen anything like it. And then the two nerds say they're going to have to kill him. No police officer, no matter how corrupt, would just stand by and watch this, but they do. And then Lenny steals their truck and gets away with it. But that leads then to the first merger back of the four main divergent paths, as Lenny ends up with the Ethel Merman crowd. Eric, we get Lenny getting to them basically around the same time that Sylvester, who after doing whatever drugs he may have been doing while he was dancing with his bimbo, he gets the phone call from Ethel Merman, and he's flying there at 80 miles per hour. There's even the scene where he does like the 1970s television thing where the car flies up a slight incline and then takes off. What do you think about the Dick Shawn character? Because he's another really over the top character. He's crying halfway as he's driving. Mama, 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 rape, rape, rape.
Yeah, his introduction is so in the midst of this sort of very madcap, high energy film. His introduction, with the awkward dancing, the pair who appear to be potentially stoned out of their mind. It's they don't quite go there, but you kind of get the sense that maybe that's what's going on. So then finding him on the road, tears streaming down his face, screaming for his mother. He's not my favorite character in the picture, but he adds a great dynamic, especially when you consider that this is the Ethel Merman character's son. There's kind of some some backstory there that you can headcanon into the picture about his upbringing and what kind of mother she was, and so on. That it's kind of delightful if you think about it a little too much.
Well, I love when she's trying to tell him what's happening, and he's not listening. And he says, "I'll be there, Mom," and he hangs up, and then she says, "He's just like your father, a big muscle-headed lunkhead," or so whatever she says.
Yeah, which is actually a charge that gets thrown on Lenny all the time, is the idea that he's just this sort of big dumb lout, despite the fact that, at least from the start of the picture, he is the most, as we've already touched on, he's the most morally upright or upstanding person in the ensemble. I think is interesting, and again, I wonder to what extent this was. This was intentional and intended to say something in the writing of the picture.
Price, any comments about the Dick Shawn character and how because that seems the Lenny and the Ethel Merman stories seem to merge. Then they're the first one to really merge back.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's an interesting parallel to be made between the Lenny Pike and the Sylvester Marcus characters, because both of them are kind of dense, like Eric is saying. And I think what's interesting about the Sylvester Marcus character is that, like Lenny Pike, his initial reaction is to do something, collaborative, something helpful to others. Sylvester Marcus wants to go and help his mom. He's not even listening. As she says, there's all this money, there's all this money, there's all this money. All he can hear is, my mom might be in trouble and I want to go and help her out, which is just such a strangely heartwarming thing to see in the context of all these other people who are trying to go and extract as much money as they can. And so I think the Sylvester Marcus character is interesting. I think the character is not as fleshed out as the character could be. I think it's a shame that they cut some of the scenes between Dick Shawn and Barry Chase. For example, the scene in which Barry Chase, the girlfriend character, reveals that the red convertible that Sylvester is driving, that's her husband's car.
Isn't she the only surviving member of the film? I think I recently read that.
Yeah, she's 90 now. She was 90 last October.
Oh, wow.
And I saw her a couple of years ago. At that meeting, she told me that her intention in those scenes was to appear stoned. And so you can see that she's lighting up a prop to represent a joint at one point in those scenes. But she also told me she had never been stoned before, so she didn't know how to portray that accurately.
I will say, Bryce, you make an excellent point about Sylvester and the fact that his initial instinct is to go do something good for his mother, to go do something right, and yet the Milton Berle character and the Terry Thomas character, when they hear that Ethel Merman is going to bring Sylvester and get him involved, their initial instinct is, this guy is probably not on the up and up. He's going to try and steal this money. They're very much reflecting their own morals in thinking this way. So their whole thought is, we don't want to bring this other person in because he's going to forget about us. He's going to go and take the money on his own, and he's going to disappear. He's going to disappear off the face of the earth with the money. They're saying a lot about themselves when they say that, when in fact, as you point out, and again, it's a great point, that's not at all what he does. In fact, the very first thing he does is ignore everything else his mother is saying and just says, "Mom, I'm coming to help." And so it's the two dimwits, along with the wife, who are kind of the three characters who most try to do the right thing throughout the picture.
Now, for me, the people, the characters that work the least are the Sid Caesar bracket of the initial four. They get there to Santa Rosita quicker than others because they find a guy who's an old crop duster plane. They get there and then they're stuck in the basement. And to me, I guess maybe it's because they are stuck in the basement that there's the least kinetic energy that I find there, no matter how many pyrotechnics blow up. It seems to be, of the four major storylines, the one that, I mean, it's not bad, but it compared to the other ones, it works the least because the Terry Thomas, Milton Berle, you have some really nice verbal interplay. You have the over-the-top Lenny stuff with the garage. Ethel Merman is chewing the scenery along with Dick Shawn. And that, for me, seems to be the least kinetic, the least funny. How about you, Price? You're shaking your head.
I agree. I've never found the hardware store scenes terribly compelling. I think that kinetic is a good word to describe some of the other character paths in the movie. I think that Sid Caesar is extremely funny, and Edie Adams does a great job of sort of playing off of that. You know, the wives, Edie Adams and Dorothy Provine. I think that their roles in this movie are so interesting because they, for whatever reason at that time, they just do not have as much interest in, pursuing this madcap chase and getting all this money. And so they just do a great job of portraying just weariness with the whole project. And so from that perspective, I enjoy the hardware store scenes, but I prefer the other character paths.
How about you, Eric? What's your take on the Sid Caesar digression?
I think you're both on point. I think the majority of this film, despite running well over 3 hours, has a large degree of forward momentum. But the forward momentum stops when they hit that hardware store. I do have to say that I think that Sid Caesar and Edie Adams don't always have a great dynamic in the same way that some of the other character pairings do. I like Edie Adams' kind of weariness of her husband's manic drive to get this money. But they don't have the kind of banter that I would have liked to have seen, and the kind of banter that might have made that hardware store scene sing a little more than it actually does. There's a couple of nice moments there. I think it's I want to say it's just before he goes to do the one last hammer blow on the door, and the whole stair structure falls apart. Where there's a couple of good one-liners there, but a lot of it, the forward momentum just kind of stops. And in fact, I like the majority of the cut scenes that were then put back into the semi-restored, not quite the roadshow version that Criterion did some years back. But I could actually do without most of the cut scenes from the hardware store for the exact reason that we've all just kind of talked about. The momentum just kind of halts there.
So then we end up with the main characters getting to Santa Rosita Park looking for the Big W, which, 60 years later, it's some palm trees that form a W. And they pick up along Peter Falk and Eddie Rochester Anderson, a couple of other people. Phil Silvers ends up there. Jonathan Winters wants to get him, and I forget which character it is. Maybe it's I don't forget if it's Ethel Merman that says, "Come on out, everyone. We know we are all here. We all want the same thing. Let's look for it together." And for most films, this would be really winding up to the climax of the film, but it's really a false climax because we see Spencer Tracy doodling around there, and this is when we really, I think, get the sense of who the Spencer Tracy character is. The closest we get to the Spencer Tracy character's inner life is when he's talking with his daughter and his wife on the phone, and I believe the woman on the phone was the gal from Night Court in the 1980s. What's her name?
Yes.
With a funny voice.
Selma Diamond.
Selma Diamond, yeah. But anyway, they were all outed and they go searching for it. Jonathan Winters, he's not the first one actually. I think Edie Adams and also maybe the wife, the wife of Milton Berle, they see the W. But the one who sees it first of the greedy types is Jonathan Winters, the Big W. So we get that denouement, they dig it up, and then Spencer Tracy makes his move for the money. Do you think that it seems, and this I think guesses why Spencer Tracy was chosen for that role is because he was the sainted white liberal hero of Hollywood back then, and to have him wanting to go off to Mexico to sip pina coladas on a beach somewhere seems out of character with not only that character but with the Spencer Tracy character. Eric, what's your take on that scene, that the first, I guess we call it the false climax of the film?
Well, I I think your point that you just made about Tracy just suddenly brings to mind Henry Fonda from Once Upon a Time in the West, that kind of casting against type thing that's happening here. What actually strikes me about Spencer Tracy in this final or a penultimate sequence is that there's kind of an interesting sense of melancholy in the way this plays out. As our growing ensemble are dashing around the park, he's kind of taking it very slow and methodical. And he's doing this for a reason. He's sort of plotting and planning. But I kind of get this sense of melancholy about it. This idea that the golden years of his life didn't go quite the way that he had hoped. He was about to be denied his pension, or at least so he thought. His family was falling apart, and he just his scenes. I feel as if there's this great unshown sigh in him that he's just sort of, okay, if I can get this last little payoff, at least I can go out with some degree of dignity. And it's only sort of after that park scene when he's actually trying to flee the others that I feel like greed fully takes hold of him. I think before that, I don't see him driven as much by greed as resignment to the idea that the life that he thought he had was falling apart around him. I think there's kind of a sadness initially before he fully gets sort of consumed with the money that I don't see people comment on a lot, but I kind of sense that it's there. Maybe it's me projecting. I don't know.
Price, your take on that scene?
I mean, I fully agree with that. I think that Tracy is, or in this movie, he's representing a character who has been honest, who has done the right thing, and who the system hasn't worked for. His family is falling apart, like Eric said. He had been promised some level of benefits in return for his service with the police department. He's not getting those as a result of these corrupt municipal politics that are being depicted in the movie. And so for him, the idea of going corrupt himself is, just like for the other people, it's a method of getting to freedom, of getting free from the shackles of this family, free from having to deal with these politics. Or for somebody like Dorothy Provine playing the Emmeline Finch character, she has the idea that if she's able to get this money, then she can also go away. She can be free of the shackles of this unhappy marriage, of this extremely overbearing mother-in-law. Everybody in this movie, or at least everybody in the main cast, is, I think, very, very strongly motivated by this idea that they don't have enough money to have the freedom that they want, or the freedom that they would qualify as freedom. And so when they get to the park and they sort of sense that they are right on top of this loot, that they're actually going to very plausibly get it, you can see like a collaboration coming back together, where Ethel Merman walks out and she says, we all know we're all here, let's work together to handle this. And for that brief 10 or 15 minutes, they collaborate with each other, because at that point they're already swept away on this fantasy of actually being free in this society that is telling them that they're free, and they feel very, very unfree in. And of course, once they get the money, that fantasy is overwhelmed by the idea of, I want it all, not I just want my part of it. And the cynicism comes back, and all of a sudden they're right back to where they started, at each other's throats, rather than helping each other out to get this outcome that many of them may deserve. For example, the Spencer Tracy character, by all indications, at least in the narrative of the movie, he's supposed to be a good guy. He's supposed to be an honest guy who has been stiffed by the system. And because he's not willing to collaborate with the others, he doesn't get his payoff at all.
Just before we break here for a moment, you had mentioned, Price, you talked about the Emmeline character and having the mother-in-law. She's actually the daughter. Ethel Merman is the mother-in-law of Milton Berle, just to be clear. So that scene under the big W ends with Spencer Tracy revealing who he is, and there's no other cops around, and it takes a few minutes after Spencer Tracy tells them to turn themselves into the police to the police department. They'll go lighter on you, etc. After a few minutes, it strikes them that they've been had, Spencer Tracy, they see him going left instead of right or something, and to head towards the border in San Diego. And then they start chasing him, and they chase him this way, that way. They end up in front of a high-rise building where they go, and it's maybe it's slated for demolition, or it's having work done on it. They're going up the stairs, and they get onto the what is it called, the fire escape. I guess a lot of buildings don't have fire escapes these days, but and it's rusty. It starts falling off because of the weight of a dozen or more human beings on it at the same time. And we get, then the fire department is called in, and they send up a cherry, what do they call, cherry picker, to try to take them off one or two at a time. But everyone gets on the cherry picker, and I think that's Sterling Holloway, the voice of Winnie the Pooh, who is the nervous fireman who says, okay, you see what happens. And he goes down there, and basically, I'll let you, Price, if you want to pick up what happens next.
Yeah, so of course at this point, any semblance of collaboration that was, rekindled at the Big W, it's completely fallen away. So everybody is piling onto this ladder truck. The ladder truck with the ladder extended all the way up, it can't support all that weight in a stable way. And so the ladder starts to pitch uncontrollably back and forth. And one after the other, each of the members of the cast is thrown off the ladder and lands in some sort of comedic way that calls back to silent comedy and the physical comedy of Buster Keaton, Charlie Chaplin, etc.
Keystone Cops, it reminds me.
Yeah. And at the end of all of this, they end up in a hospital. All of the main cast members, with the exception of the Ethel Merman character, the Edie Adams and Dorothy Provine characters, who were hanging back and not going up to the top of the building to begin with, they're all bandaged up in a hospital, mulling over what their fate's going to be.
They all, as they fall off, the different fates await them. Probably the one fate that probably someone today would object a little bit to is when Eddie Rochester Anderson ends up in the lap of an Abe Lincoln statue. But other than that, some of them are electrocuted and fall down. I think Sylvester goes flying along a 30 or 40 foot run of tables. I guess maybe there were Cub Scouts having a picnic there or something. Spencer Tracy ends up in a dog pet shop in the door the front window. Eric, what of all of the fates of them, which ones did you find the most interesting in terms of how they get off the ladder? Because it goes on for about 4 or 5 full minutes with them.
Yeah, the final scene there gets increasingly absurd and increasingly unrealistic. But I think the movie sort of prepared us for this early on. In some ways, that gas station scene earlier with Jonathan Winters is kind of the film's action heart in microcosm. In that in the gas station there's this constant sense of escalation until by the very end it becomes very outlandish. And the film itself does that as well, where the action escalates and escalates and escalates until this, by the end here, we've reached a point of absurdity that might have taken us out of the film earlier, but by the end, we're completely ready for it. And I do think Spencer Tracy's final fate is one of both of the funnier ones and more interesting ones, because he had initially been the authority figure throughout this picture. He had initially been one of the people that we thought were one of the good guys, and he quite literally ends up in the doghouse in the end, both figuratively and literally, which I think was kind of a nice fate. And I do also think that they did a nice job with the looping film to get the dogs licking on his face. That can sometimes pull you out a little bit, but I think it holds up pretty nicely.
Price, which of the fates there did you find the funniest or at least funny?
I think that for just sort of absurd silent comedy value, my favorite is probably where Phil Silvers is flung through a window and lands on a Murphy bed, which then pops up and locks him in the wall. I thought that one was quite entertaining. Yeah, in the final sequence, the limitations of the visual effects technology that were available at the time, I think, really does show most.
Yeah.
For example, with the way that the Spencer Tracy dog licking scene is looped. I'm not sure why they did that and why that was necessary, but it is extremely obviously sort of tacked together. And a lot of what they had to do to create that sequence was compositing matte paintings, compositing miniatures, compositing them with people. And in some cases, it can look a little bit unrealistic or phony in a way that some of the smaller scale special effects earlier in the film are less noticeable. For example, with the gas station scene, that is small scale enough. They're able to build the whole thing in full scale and knock it down. Now, it's obviously made out of balsa wood and breakaway glass,
Yeah.
but even with that, there's a reality to that that is more compelling today, I think, than in the final hook and ladder truck sequence.
So earlier you had mentioned, Price, about the film sort of being a snapshot of comedy history, the various types, especially film history. And the film ends with basically one of the oldest comedic tropes from vaudeville, a man, or in this case a woman, slipping on a banana peel that's been thrown down, because the boys, including Spencer Tracy, all end up in the same hospital. They're all moaning and bitching about this. Spencer Tracy basically says, "Shut up, you idiots! They're going to throw the book at me and let you off because of me." My favorite comment in that one last scene was when Sylvester goes, "Man, you were trying to what did he say?" He goes, "You're trying to steal the whole scene, baby, steal the whole scene." But then in comes Ethel Merman and the other two women, and they're marching like martinets. And Ethel Merman slips, and then everyone, the film ends with everyone laughing. What did you think, Price, about them going back really to a joke that probably goes back to Mesopotamia or something?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the climax of the film there is, I think, satisfying for a lot of viewers. I think that the another thing that adds a lot to that moment is the triumphant swell of the film score that pops up, because it's been silent for a few minutes at that point. There's no music playing other than just sort of like this very sort of quiet and sad, listless horn section in the background, or woodwind section in the background, and then all of a sudden all the orchestra swells at that point, and there's a triumphalness to it. I'm not sure what to make out of that thematically. I don't know what the movie is trying to say with that. The mother-in-law character got screwed, so I guess now we're laughing. But in terms of just the viewer value with the score and with the visuals and everybody laughing in the bandages, it's pretty funny.
Eric, what's your take on the final Ethel Merman fall, etc.?
Well, I think one thing that it does, and of course it's just a very kind of cheap physical humor, very cheap slapstick, and I don't say that in a negative way. But I think one thing you can argue that it does is that so all of the male characters in the film and all the greedy characters in the film have gotten their comeuppance. They've all sort of suffered for their greed. And Ethel Merman seems to have her final moment of triumph. She's kind of strutting in there very powerfully, but her being the only of the trio of female characters, the only one who was purely driven by greed, she gets her final bit of punishment by fate as well, which she certainly earned. Whereas the two wife characters did not. So it's kind of that like last little hit that she gets to take from Faith. Yeah, there is a little bit of that kind of very tired, annoying mother-in-law joke that's there. Like, haha, now we get to all laugh at the annoying mother-in-law. But the film wasn't too heavy with that kind of dated humor anyway. I can really only think of one other kind of gag in the movie that leans on that kind of thing. So it it doesn't pull me out too much, and I don't think that too much it would pull out modern viewers either.
Now,
So one other interesting. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say one other piece of trivia about that particular scene. So when the stunt double for Ethel Merman slips on the banana peel, in order to protect the stunt double from getting injured, they have a wire harness that's wired to an apparatus on the ceiling, which was also used in other parts of the film. For example, when the characters are bouncing off the telephone wires and getting electrocuted, they had these wire harnesses to produce that sort of flying in the air effect without injuring the actors. My cousin Danny Lee was the special effects director on this movie, and he designed the wire rig to fly those actors into the air. And a more refined version of that rig was used to fly Mary Poppins in Mary Poppins the next year. So it's an interesting connection between these two movies, same special effects director, and even some of the same exact technology.
So now we get your real connection there, your cousin.
Huh.
So let's talk about the critical reception of the film then and now. From all I've gathered, it got middling reviews. Some people thought it was hilarious. Some people thought it was terrible, especially since the 60s were getting more sophisticated, post-neo-realism and all that kind of stuff. And I guess by the 1970s, when I first saw it in the early 70s or so with my dad on TV, it was, every 3 or 4 months. It would play 3 or 4 times a year, maybe on local television channels, and it was a good way to blow off 3 or 4 hours in the afternoon on a Saturday or a Sunday morning when it was airing. But I think it has gotten a bit more critical approval especially this century, the last 20 or so years. Eric, what is your take on how the film was received and initially, and how it's looked at now?
I can't speak to its era. Certainly, I can recall as a kid when I first saw it, which would have been probably late 70s, early 80s, somewhere around there. It was the same sort of thing. It was kind of irregular on television, kind of hailed as I think it seemed to be reaching classic status at that point. At least that was the impression that I got. The thing that sort of disappointed me over the years is that I get the sense that, except for people who are very much into cinema of this era, it's not widely considered an essential classic, and I think it deserves to be. I think it's one of the great movies of its time. I think it's one of the great comedies. And despite the fact that it's got the Criterion treatment, and there are people who have great appreciation for it, such as Price, it doesn't. I don't see it coming up in online discussion and conversation and commentary nearly as much as I think it deserves, because but I think it just works on so many levels, and I think it's just such an endlessly entertaining movie. Again, you would not expect a 3-hour plus madcap comedy to stand up as well as it does, but I think it holds up wonderfully. I would argue that it is still not as appreciated to the degree that it deserves.
Yeah, I think there was that film 3 or 4 years later that came out with Lucille Ball, and was it Henry Fonda, or where they merged family? It was sort of like a pre-Brady Bunch kind of thing. I forget the name of the film, but I've often found, and it was a tepid comedy at best. I often found it lumped in with that, or with some of the sort of British kind of comedic films, like what Woody Allen did with What's New Pussycat kind of thing. It seems to, and I think I don't think they're as bad as the Woody Allen film is not as bad as its claim to be, but I think this is a cut above that, and I agree with you. Price, what is your take on the critical reception, how it started and where it is now?
So yeah, at the time, as far as I'm aware, and I'm not the world's greatest expert on that element of this movie, it got middling reviews. It was fairly financially successful at the box office. It was very much presented as a big tentpole feature. One of the interesting elements of the release of this movie. I'm not sure how this affected it, but it was released in theaters, granted a more limited release, within a couple of weeks of the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And so I'm not sure, what the role of that big national event played in people's willingness or interest to go and see this movie at the time. But as far as I know, it was well received by audiences, and it became just, I think, a very big element of the sort of mid-century media viewers' idea of movies at that time. If I talked to somebody who was a kid in the mid 1960s, or who was in their early adulthood in the mid 1960s, a lot of the time they'll mention this movie as something that they really enjoyed at the time or enjoyed watching on TV in years afterward. In terms of the critical reception of this movie today, one of the ongoing campaigns that has been out there for many years, if not decades at this point, is the campaign for the National Film Registry to recognize this movie as culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant, whatever the criteria that they use. And to this point, the National Film Registry has not recognized this movie despite a lot of nominations. I don't really know a lot about the National Film Registry. It's not something that I would really spend too much time trying to convince them that this is a great movie. If they don't think it's great, that's their opinion. Good for them. But I think that there's definitely been an increasingly significant amount of elite film acceptance of this movie as something that is worthwhile to pay attention to. So for example, back in 2012 or 2013, I can't remember the year, I think it was 2012, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences hosted what I would consider the last great screening of It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. They had a ton of personnel from the movie there, a ton of actors: Carl Reiner, Mickey Rooney, Barry Chase, Jonathan Winters. Mickey Rooney and Carl Reiner did a tap dance on stage. They were both 90, 93, 94 at the time. And that the Academy would put on an event like that at their headquarters spoke to me, told me that this is something that is getting more elite film attention. If you look also at the Criterion Collection box set of this movie that came out about 10 years ago now, that was another indicator that people are paying more attention to this. I think a big factor in that is a significant online fan community for this movie that you don't see for a lot of other movies of the era. I'm not talking necessarily about like general film discussion boards, but groups like Advocates for It's a Mad, 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 Mad World on Facebook. Extremely popular Facebook group. It's been a big deal for 15 years. There's probably thousands of people in there, and it gets many posts a day. And there are several groups like that on Facebook. And so, I think that just relates back to the idea that this is a big movie in sort of the mid-century movie viewer's imagination. It's something that tied together a lot of other media for people at that time. And so people really value it. People really look back on it fondly.
Let me just ask you, Price, as we're wrapping up here. I think it was Eric who mentioned Cannonball Run as sort of being influenced by it. Does this film have any influence, do you think? Because it seems to me that kind of all-star extravaganza, be it comedic or not, just doesn't have any truck in today's film franchise world, because this is a standalone film. And I have heard that there were plans for sequels 10 or 12 years later in the mid-70s, but that never happened. Can you address either of them, the influence and a possible sequel?
Yeah, as far as there's lots of discussion of a possible sequel by various people. I have no idea if any of that is founded. I think that Stanley Kramer's family had talked about that at one point, but it never really panned out. In terms of contemporary or rather modern sort of takeoffs of this movie, I think that the big comedy tentpole movie is not as big anymore. If you look to the box office today, a lot of it is major sort of extensions of previously existing IP. Star Wars, lots of different superhero movies. It's a lot of stuff that is, movie studios see as a safe bet that will draw in good profits, and comedy just hasn't really been seen that way for a long time. And so I think the most recent movie that really tried to takeoff of this formula, if you were looking at like Hollywood movies, would be Rat Race, which I think is 20 years old now, which is a reasonably entertaining sort of chase comedy, at least from my perspective, although I haven't seen it since I was 12. And then if you're looking at like broader cinema, Damal, which is a Bollywood movie that came out, I think, in 2007, is a loose remake of It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. And apparently that was quite successful in Bollywood film markets. So if you haven't seen Damal, it's fun to watch a bunch of folks over in India chasing to Goa to look for the big W.
Any comment from you, Eric, on the influence of this film?
I've always kind of put this film in a pocket or category of films that, I don't know, but I grant them a term. They're not quite road movies. They're not all necessarily chase movies, but I kind of think of this in a collection of movies from my youth, along with Herbie the Love Bug and Smokey and the Bandit and the Cannonball Run films of, these kind of very comedic madcap chases across a stretch of the United States. And that's not something that we kind of see too much anymore. When I think of an ensemble picture of this scale in the modern era, I think more of the Ocean's movies, and they're not even that recent any longer. That's how quickly the years go by. And of course, they're not, though they are funny at times, they're not comedies, they're heist films. There's not a lot of crossover, but it's just that kind of that idea of let's bring together a lot of today's biggest stars and get them together to go on this kind of adventure together. But yeah, they kind of where It's a Mad, 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 Mad World comes from, and the films that may have been a little influenced by it, does kind of feel like something that's fallen by the wayside. I mean, the last great chase picture was not very funny, and I'm thinking of Mad Max Fury Road. Not much of an ensemble and not very hilarious.
So actually mention there before we move on, as I'm thinking more about just ensemble comedy pieces from the last few years, these aren't chase movies per se, but I think that there is an echo of It's a Mad, 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 Mad World in the Knives Out series, where you have just a large ensemble of highly ranked actors doing comedy, maybe anchored by one sort of straight character. It's not quite the same formula, but it's certainly been successful. So there's an appetite for something in the general universe of the ensemble comedy still today.
So this episode is called Why It's a Mad, 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 Mad World is Great. I would answer that by saying that I think it's non-pareil and the apex of its particular form as sort of the broad over-the-top comedy and also the all-star type film. And for many of the reasons that I and the rest of us have stated. If I could ask both of you, let me start with you, Eric, for those people who have not watched it and maybe only found out about this film by seeing us discuss it, if you could just sum up why this film is great and why you would recommend them watching it.
I think this film was great because despite its reputation as being an all-star ensemble film, it doesn't in fact require you to have knowledge of who these great stars were for it to be enjoyable, because the film really hangs together on its relentless energy, its witty banter, its incredible stunts. We really didn't get too much into the action sequences and the stunts and the incredible drivers who pulled off some of the things that we see on screen. You don't need to have knowledge of who this ensemble is. So despite the fact that it has this reputation of being this great all-star movie, I think anyone can go into it blind without a lot of knowledge of mid-century cinema and still find a lot of enjoyment because it's doing a lot of the sort of things that modern audiences today still enjoy. If you think of it as a far less serious, say, Fast and Furious movie, to make a very absurd comparison. But I think that's why this movie is great, is the fact that it doesn't require or lean on or need this all-star cast in order for it to be a fantastic, fun, and funny romp.
Same question to you, Price. Why is this film great, and why would you recommend it to someone who's never seen it?
I think that one thing that really keeps me interested in this movie so many years after I first saw it is the different levels that you can watch it on. It's extremely well suited for just recreational watching. You know, you grab a beer and you just want to laugh, or you just want to admire sort of sweeping shots of California in the mid-century. You want to watch car chases and zany scenarios. It's a great watch if that's the mood you're in. If you want to deconstruct the social ideology of mid-century America, you can also get a lot out of analyzing this movie, and looking at the actions of the characters, and you know, how they react to the situations that they're put in. And you know, as I get older and I look, you know, I look more at movies through that kind of lens, it's still just as relevant and fun for me as it was when I was 10, and you know, just eyes bugging out at these crazy car chases through the places that I knew, you know, growing up in Los Angeles.
Well, I will link to both of your websites and YouTube channels below so people can find out more about you. I want to thank you both for spending almost an hour and a half speaking about this, I think, underappreciated but great film. So thank you both.
Great deal. Thank you very much.